All right, today we're tackling an essay that might just change how you think about health ethics. I mean, it really challenges us to look beyond the doctor's office, way beyond, even past our own borders, and to start asking some pretty tough questions about who's responsible for what.
So, for about the last half-century, there's been this one single idea that has absolutely dominated the world of medical ethics. It's a principle that's so powerful, it's pretty much the foundation for every single interaction you've ever had with a doctor or a nurse.
And that idea? It's patient autonomy. It's the belief that you, and only you, are the one in charge of what happens to your body. You've got the right to say yes to a treatment, or no. Your informed consent? Well, that's the absolute gold standard. But here's where it gets complicated. What happens when what's best for you isn't what's best for everyone? This is that classic clash, right? It's the exact point where the ethics of your personal doctor's visit slam right into the ethics of public health. So let's start in that familiar territory, okay? Let's talk about the ethics of the doctor's office, that one-on-one relationship between you and your doctor. Because for decades, this is pretty much all medical ethics has focused on.
And look, this whole framework was a huge deal back in the 70s. I mean, it was revolutionary. It was all about tearing down that old doctor knows best attitude, medical paternalism. Instead, the spotlight was on the individual. Informed consent became everything, and any kind of force or compulsion, that was seen as completely out of line, ethically speaking.
But here's the twist. The author of the essay we're looking at, a philosopher named Onora O'Neill, she argues that this laser focus, this, in her words, damaging preoccupation with individual autonomy, has created a massive blind spot for us when it comes to the bigger picture of health.
Okay, so let's do exactly that. Let's zoom out, let's pull the camera back from that one patient in the exam room and look at the health of the entire population.
And this chart really lays out the fundamental conflict. On one side, you've got clinical ethics, which is all about the individual patient. It's guided by autonomy, by consent, but on the other side, you have public health ethics. That's about the whole population, the collective good, and sometimes that requires compulsion. They're just playing by two completely different rule books.
And the reason why is actually pretty simple. I mean, think about it. You can't really have an opt-in system for clean air or safe drinking water, right? For these big public health measures to actually work, they pretty much have to apply to everybody, across the board.
And what's funny is, we accept this kind of necessary compulsion in our daily lives all the time without even thinking about it. The taxes we pay for healthcare? Compulsory. The safety rules for the food in our grocery stores? Compulsory. We just get that these things are needed for society to be safe and healthy.
But what happens when we take that intense focus on individual choice and apply it to something like, say, vaccinations? Well, the essay points to a really stark example. In places like the UK and Germany, putting individual autonomy first has led to vaccination rates dropping so low that whole communities are now teetering on the edge of measles epidemics. It's a perfect and kind of scary example of that ethical blind spot in action. So here's the bottom line of this first part. By putting individual choice up on a pedestal as the only thing that matters in medical ethics, we've ended up ignoring the most powerful tools we have for improving health for everyone. The big public health initiatives that protect us all. Okay, you ready? Let's zoom out one more time, even further. Because let's be real, diseases and health crises, they don't exactly stop and show their passports at the border.
And this brings us to the author's second big critique. She calls it another damaging preoccupation. This idea that justice, and that includes health justice, is something that's purely a domestic affair. That our responsibilities just stop at our nation's border.
I mean, in the world we live in today, this whole idea of a neat, bounded society just doesn't hold up. Diseases travel fast, global economics create patterns of poverty and health that cross continents. Our borders, as the essay puts it, are multiply porous. Things are constantly flowing in and out.
So, if the old way of thinking is too focused on just one person and too stuck inside national borders, what's the alternative? Clearly, we need a new ethical framework, one that's actually built to handle health problems on a global scale. And this is where we get to the real philosophical heart of the argument. The proposed solution isn't some giant new law, but a really subtle and really powerful shift in how we think about the problem.
You've heard this phrase a million times, right? A universal right to health. You hear it from politicians, you read it in international agreements, and as O'Neill says, it sounds great. It's a rather fetching idea. But is it actually the best way to get things done?
See, the big problem with only talking about rights is that it can be, well, pretty vague. A right doesn't mean much if you can't point to exactly who has the job of making sure you get it, right? What happens if a government can't or won't deliver on that right to health? Suddenly, it's just words on paper, not a reality.
So the author suggests we just flip the whole thing on its head. Instead of starting with what people are entitled to, let's start by figuring out our obligations. It's a much more practical way to go about it. It forces us to ask those tough, specific questions. Okay, who has to do what, for whom, and how are they going to do it?
Okay, great. So if we're all about obligations now, who actually holds them? Who's on the hook for public health? Well, the answer isn't as simple as pointing a finger at one group.
Turns out the list is pretty long. Of course, governments have obligations, but so do big international players like the World Health Organization, and NGOs, and community groups, even multinational corporations. The big idea here is that the obligation falls on anybody who has the power to actually make a difference.
At the end of the day, what this all boils down to is just being practical. When there's a huge public health crisis, maybe the question we should be asking isn't whose job is this supposed to be, but who can actually fix this right now, effectively and accountably? And the answer might be different everywhere you look. Maybe in one place it's a local group, and in another it's a giant company. What really matters is what works.
And that brings us right back to you, to us. This whole idea doesn't just apply to giant institutions. When you shift your thinking from a passive right that you have to an active obligation that you hold, it kind of forces you to think about your own role in all this. So, if improving public health really is a shared obligation, what's your part? It's a big question and a pretty good one to end on.